Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We are going to trace the absolutely awe-inspiring arc of human progress, and we'll uncover the very specific mechanisms that built the world we live in today. By zeroing in on the exact turning points of history, we can understand exactly how we got here.
Now you might be wondering, how did we go from floating atoms to global dominance? I mean, it's a question of just sheer mind-boggling scale. 3 billion years ago, we were literally just little atoms floating around in the Earth's petri dish. Fast forward to today, and Homo sapiens completely dominate the globe. So how did that happen? Well, through the mechanism of civilization.
Just think about how rapidly we compress deep time here. We go from atoms to early hominids to cold-adapted Neanderthals, and then, boom, an explosive spark. Around 4000 BCE, the citizens of Uruk actually figured out how to harvest grain. That sudden, monumental jump from raw daily survival to planned cultivation, it changed absolutely everything.
Now don't panic at the massive scope of all this history. We've actually broken this entire story down into 5 highly digestible chapters: foraging to farming, rules, rulers, and pyramids, the age of empires, faiths and fractures, and finally, a connected global web.
Chapter 1. Foraging to farming.
So early farming actually came with a massive physical cost. Because crushing grains with hand mills was so intensely brutal, the average height of men actually shrank from 5'9" down to 5'3". We literally traded in our hunter-gatherer super athlete physiques to become smaller, landlocked farmers. Crazy, right?
And being tied to the land like that immediately demanded massive social hierarchies. Take ancient Egypt, for example. The masses at the very bottom labored intensely, farming and, literally building pyramids in the off-season. And all of that massive effort was funneled upwards through artisans and bureaucrats for one reason: just to ensure a single pharaoh achieved immortality.
Chapter 2. Rules, Rulers, and Pyramids.
So a population's booming, how do they keep society from tearing itself apart? Well, listen to this quote from Babylonian king Hammurabi's legal code back in 1772 BCE. It really shows the heavy price of early civilization. There was absolutely no illusion of equality here whatsoever. He laid out a strict caste system where a noble's bone was simply worth more than a slave's. It was incredibly harsh, but it established a firm, undeniable structure of value and consequence.
Meanwhile, across the world in China, leaders justified their absolute power a bit differently. They relied on something called the mandate of heaven. And the catch here was that a ruler's power wasn't permanent. Heaven granted the right to rule based on merit and virtue. If an emperor failed to protect the people from things like floods and famines, the heavens would send signs, and that dynasty would fall. It was a brilliant way to keep rulers somewhat accountable to the universe.
To help everyday people actually cope with this incredibly hard life, a really fascinating philosophical split emerged. On one hand, you had Confucianism, which demanded strict rituals, manners, and loyalty to maintain a rigid societal order. But on the other hand, Taoism offered this peaceful retreat, essentially teaching farmers to align with the universe's natural flow and just focus on what they could actually control.
Chapter 3. The Age of Empires. It is wild to consider the extreme contrast in how these early powerhouses governed themselves. In Sparta, you have this total obsession with physical perfection and war, all propped up by enslaved helots. But over in Athens, they are experimenting with a wildly chaotic democracy, literally using a machine with tubes and balls, the Chloroterion, to randomly select citizens for leadership. But, not everyone loved that chaotic Athenian system. The philosopher Plato completely rejected random democracy. He argued that navigating a state requires deep, dedicated expertise, and he advocated for a philosopher king who was dedicated to logic. And historically, ambitious leaders absolutely loved this idea. Virtually every conqueror believed that they were that unique, chosen philosopher king.
But here's the thing. Even the greatest, most organized empires eventually crumble under the weight of external threats and internal division. By the late 300s, Rome was dangerously fractured, leadership was weak, and terrifying nomadic warriors like the Huns were pushing displaced tribes right into Roman territory. It was a powder keg waiting to explode.
And then we hit the breaking point. On August 24th, 410 AD, the unthinkable actually happened. The Visigoths sacked Rome. For the first time in nearly 800 years, a foreign army occupied the historic city. It sent massive shockwaves around the world as the mighty Roman Empire finally collapsed, leaving this huge power vacuum in its wake.
Chapter 4: Faiths and Fractures.
The staggering speed of this next expansion is just mind-blowing. From the angel Gabriel appearing to Muhammad in 610 AD to the taking of Mecca, by 716 AD, the Arab Empire had swept all the way from Lisbon in Europe right to the borders of China. It carried an entirely new faith and culture with it at lightning speed.
But as different expanding faiths inevitably collided with one another, the results were explosive. The Crusades were sparked when the Seljuk Turks took Jerusalem, which prompted Pope Urban II to promise spiritual rewards to knights who fought back. Religious fervor was highly weaponized by all sides here, resulting in centuries of absolutely devastating back-and-forth warfare.
Now, while those religious wars raged in the West, over in the East, Genghis Khan united the nomadic tribes. And his conquests were so vast and so brutal that an estimated 8% of modern South Asian men are his direct descendants. Just let that sink in for a second. That kind of unified conquest literally left an inescapable mark on human DNA.
Chapter 5: A Connected Global Web.
As the world became more connected, that trade came with a terrifying price tag. The bubonic plague, traveling along the Silk Road and on merchant ships, killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people. Yet, out of that tragedy came a profound historical irony. The severe labor shortage meant that surviving peasants suddenly had massive leverage. For the first time, they could actually demand better rights and wages from the nobility.
And this really kicks off a relentless domino effect. When the Ottomans captured Constantinople in 1453, they cut off the major trade routes. This forces Europeans to frantically seek new paths, which leads Columbus to the Americas. That directly fuels the violent Spanish conquest of empires like the Aztecs. While back home, Europe tears itself apart in the 30 Years' War, which ultimately births the whole concept of modern sovereign states.
Which brings us to a radical, real game-changer of a shift. After literally millennia of pharaohs, kings, and emperors ruling by divine right, the American Declaration of Independence in 1776 proposed something entirely new. It openly challenged the entire historical mechanism of hierarchy, stating that all men are created equal, and that true power actually belongs to the people.
Because at the end of the day, civilization is an ongoing, high-stakes experiment. We've gone from floating atoms to hunched-over farmers to subjects of a pharaoh to citizens of a hyper-connected global web. So as you look around at our incredibly complex world today, with all its brutal costs and its incredible triumphs, you really have to ask yourself, what chapter are we writing right now? What will be the next great mechanism to drive human civilization forward?